because it goes through the process of taking it into ZBrush, taking it into, or not to ZBrush, into Keyshot. 520. Come on. Doesn't want to copy it. There it goes. All right, so I'm setting my project and I'm opening up the file just so you can see what it is. Now, what we do here, you're gonna do individually on your own projects, okay? But this is just, everything's already set up the way it's supposed to be set up. So first of all, we have to understand what Keyshot is for. So inside Maya, we've dealt with texturing stuff before. We've dealt with, I need this to look like wood, or I need this to look like metal, or I need it to look like glass. And we spend a great deal of time tweaking a bunch of parameters to get the glass to look like glass, and the metal to look like metal, and the plastic to look like plastic. Keyshot has all of that stuff already set up, okay? We need our lights to look nice. Keyshot has lights already set up. So it's a very quick way for us to drag and drop stuff in there. One of the main reasons people use it is because of its speed, because of its ability to take a model like this, to drop it in there and to get some pretty decent results right away without having to tweak 7,000 parameters. You know, if you remember from the intro class or any other Maya classes you've had, it gets very complicated with all this stuff. You can do animations in Keyshot, but it's typically, I don't like doing animations in there unless it's just like a turntable type thing is the only thing I would do. So inside Maya, we have to know what stuff do we have to do in Maya and then what stuff do we have to do in Keyshot. In Maya, I'm very comfortable moving stuff around. I'm very comfortable laying out textures, okay? So that's what I set up inside of Maya. I lay out where I want stuff to be. So if I want my composition to be like this, I want to lay it out just like this inside of Maya. If I want this sign a little bit to the right or whatever, I like to set all that up inside of Maya, because when I get to Keyshot, it just makes everything else a lot easier if I'm thinking ahead of time of what we're going to be ending up with. So for this example, this has been set up landscape. It's been set up as a horizontal layout. Okay, your renderings are going to be vertical layouts. All right, so yours are going to be 8 by 10. This is not 8 by 10. This is 960 by 540, which is meant for TV. Your stuff is going to be meant for like a magazine, which is typically vertical, right? Right? Okay. I'm getting worried. All right, so I'm laying this out like I would want this to be seen here. You can move stuff inside of Keyshot, but it's not as easy as it is inside Maya. There is no like manipulator like this where we could just grab and move and position it where we want it to go. The other thing I do inside here is I lay out all my UVs. That sign, the wood that's on there, I made sure that it looked the way I wanted it to look. The picture here is laid out perfect. The label here, I'm not sure what happened to the label, it was there. Come on. The label, oh, I deleted the tape. There we go. The label on this can is laid out exactly like I want that label on the can to be. Okay? If it was stretched out, I'd want to set all that stuff up inside of Maya before I get to Keyshot. Okay? I'm not worried about parameters. I'm not worried about reflectivity or glossiness or specularity. All I'm worried about is where that label is wrapped around. That's all I'm worried about here. I'm only worried about where this sign is laid out, okay? Where this Gillette shaving cream is set up. If I go to my UV editor and I decide I want to move something around, I can grab it and I can move it up or down or left or right or whatever I need to get that to be laid out how I want it to be laid out, all right? So I do all of that work inside of Maya. Then the other thing I do is I make sure that all of my specific items have their own material on them. All right, there's other ways we can bring stuff into Keyshot, but one of the things that makes it easy is if I have all the like objects assigned to the same material. So if you look at my light bulbs here, this light bulb is a yellowy color, and this one is a black color, but you see how they're on the same Maya material, okay? that same Mia is having two colors. One is like basically an on state and the other one is an off state. So what I should do is grab these ones, that one, and I'm just going to go through. Now you're going to see in your file when you bring it in that it's not going to be the case. It's not set up like that. But I'm just going to show you how I can just add this to a different Mia. And I'm using Mia just because I'm using Mia. You don't have to use Mia as your thing. Did I miss one? Yes, I did. See, I messed up. Try that again. This, just to grab the dark one, Sean. If I mess up, someone yell at me before I go too far. There we go. So I'm just going to assign a different material, and it doesn't matter. I'm going to assign Lambert, Fong, whatever, okay? All my actual material properties will come inside of Keyshot. So I'm going to call this Dark Bulbs 01. And then I also have to name the shading group. So typically in Maya, we don't name the shading group, but going to Keyshot, we need to label the shading group. Dark Bulbs SG, okay? And then I can also grab the light bulbs and do the same thing. It's not terribly important. The bulbs have no UVs on them, in that there's nothing special set up about them. I don't have a label on them. If I did, then I would definitely make sure it's all set up ahead of time. There we go. So I'll just assign a new Lambert to this and call this bright bulbs. And I will call this bright bulbs. SG. Okay. So I went through and I made sure everything had a very distinct layout or a distinct material on them, and everything was named. It's very important that things are named because, again, it becomes very difficult to select stuff if we don't know what things are called. So now I'm going to grab everything in my scene and just go to Export Selection, and I'm going to save this as an OBJ. Okay. By default, OBJ is not a selectable choice from your exporter. So we have to go to Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and then I have to find the OBJ exporter. Doot and doot. File export. So now OBJ will be selectable. There it is. And I can call this Keyshot. I call it Keyshot Send. I'm just going to call this Keyshot Send 2. Okay. It also helps as you're naming stuff to say where it's going to. Some programs like ZBrush, you may export a certain file that's meant just to go to ZBrush. You would label it to ZBrush. So that's what that's what I just did. So now I'm going to open up Keyshot. So I want you on your computer to open up Keyshot, and this part we're going to do together with my Gillette can just so you can see the process of setting this stuff up. All right. So just go to your Start menu and type in Keyshot, and then Keyshot 64 will pop open. And I believe Keyshot 6 is out now, and we're using Keyshot 5. There are some improvements over Keyshot 5 that 6 has. We just don't have it yet. All right, and right away you can kind of see, you know, the recently opened are over here. These are actual like sample ones that you could open up and play with. I'm just going to close that. And then what we need to do is we need to import our object into the scene. So if you look down at the bottom, very easy, it just says import. So we just click import. All right, and then we're just going to go find that OBJ. So I'm going to go to my P drive, go to here, go to this, work, demo, go to scenes. Okay, so here's the Keyshot Send. So you're going to open up the Keyshot Send OBJ. And I'm going to open up the Keyshot Send 2 OBJ.
Where's the OBJ's extension?
OBJ. This first window is kind of important because we want to make sure that we have it set up. All right, so in here, you'll see that there are certain things like center geometry, snap to ground, keep original for the location. I usually click on just keep original location. All right, so open up location and hit keep original. The reason I do that is because let's say I want to change the can out for some reason. Okay, so in Keyshot I can delete the can, go to Maya, do something with the can, and then re-import it in, it'll drop it right into the same spot. If I don't have that checked, then it's going to drop it in wherever, and I have to re-move it back to where it should go. So make sure under location, it's keep original. Under size, keep original. Under the units, just set that to centimeters. Actually, we'll set it to inches. That's fine. Okay, that way it'll actually make it a little bit bigger and fit in the scene. We want to scale it up. The up orientation, very important one. Make sure the up orientation is Y. In Maya, up orientation is Y, so we want to use that. In programs like CATIA and Unigraphics, theirs is Z. Okay, so we have to be aware that their ups are different. Environment and cameras are fine. Materials, we want to go in here. And we're going to say keep individual parts, but group by materials. Okay? So what this is going to do is that when we bring our project in, it's going to allow us to reassign materials to things, but it'll also show us every single object that's in there. And then under geometry, I just leave calculate normals on. Okay? So keep originals, Y. Keep individual parts, group by materials. You could also choose objects, but we're doing materials this time. And import. Okay? So once you've imported it, this is what we should have. Now the controls are different than Maya's. Okay? Sorry. The controls are exactly the same as Maya's. That's a different program. But it is a little bit tricky to get used to because of the way that like Maya's I alt right click in and drag forward and it zooms in. Is that when you go to ZBrush and Keyshot and Maya and Nuke and all these other ones, that all of them have different hotkeys. So basically you just have to get to the point where your body knows what to do and you just let it do it. Okay? You just don't worry about what's happening. You just hit this groove where you just know what the keys are and you just let it go. Okay? So if we look at this, you'll see that everything in my scene is blue, except for in my case, the light bulbs actually were lit up, but not the signage. Okay, but in yours, everything is blue, right? Okay, because everything in your scene is a Mia, that's why everything's blue. Okay, on mine, because I assigned Lamberts to those light bulbs, they turned white. None of that matters. I just want to point out that that's why everything is blue and not colored at all. So there's a couple areas we're going to play with. This left side here is all of our presets. So you'll see there's a huge list of materials that we can pick from. There's a huge selection of colors, a bunch of environments that we can use, a bunch of backdrops, a bunch of textures. There's a whole bunch of stuff that comes preloaded in the software, which makes it super duper duper awesome. Okay? Now the other part that we have to worry about is this other side. So there's always two sides to this. The left side is all your presets, that's where I keep them. And then the right side is all the stuff that's in your scene. So just like your outliner, that's what we want to pull up as the outliner so we can start assigning things and editing properties. So down here under project, you would click that button and it would pull up this project area. Okay, so make sure your window is big enough you can see it, and then click on project. The other side here, this is just library. So library, project. Two buttons right in the bottom. You can just make sure they're clicked. All right. You'll notice too that as we zoom in and out, we get this really grainy look. And then when we let go, it's like getting better and better and better. This is making a gradual rendering. Okay, so instead of us hitting the render button, it's always rendering. Okay, we spin around, it's rendering. We spin around again, it's rendering. We zoom in or out, it's rendering. Okay. That's one of the neat things about it. It could be kind of like one of the bad things if you have a huge piece of geometry in your scene. So over here on the right, you see it says models, cameras, and scene sets. So under models, if you open up the Keyshot send, you should see a list of all the materials in your scene. Okay, and you'll also see that there is, for your light bulbs, that you have all the light bulbs are listed also, right? I'm assuming right. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to assign a material to the cap. So we're going to go to the material list on the left side and scroll down to plastics. And we're going to find a hard, shiny blue plastic and just drag the blue plastic onto the cap and then let go. Okay, now you see what it did there. It just drops it on, and now that blue plastic is assigned to that cap. And if you look at it, that looks like a pretty photorealistic blue plastic cap sitting on top of it. Yeah? Yeah. You'll see that it also has reflections in there. It also has lighting so we can see some shadows. The whole scene comes with all of this stuff preloaded, and we can adjust all these things as we go. Now we could also come over here. You see where this says cap? I could also drag it here and drag it over to this area and assign it to the cap that way too. That's another way that I could assign that material. All right, so that's pretty cool for that one. I'm gonna go to soft plastics. Come on. Don't crash on me now. There we go. I'm gonna go to soft plastics, and I think I'm gonna go to rough. And I'm gonna drag this soft white rough, or soft gray rough ball onto the foam. Okay, I'm not necessarily looking at what looks like or what should be the actual thing, like foam is not plastic, but if I looked at a picture of what foam looks like, I could say that that looks very much like a plastic. Okay, so that's why I chose soft rough plastic for that. And even the color, even though it was chosen as gray, it actually brightens it up a little bit because of our lighting, so it turns out pretty nice. For the bottom of the can, there's a little lip down here. I want to get a brushed metal, so I'm going to scroll up here to metals on the left. I'm going to go to there we go, anodized, and I'm going to go to brushed. And I'm just going to find I think this blue brushed might look neat. So I'm just going to drag this blue brushed onto the bottom of that. Now it might take a little bit of finessing to get it right on that bottom piece, but you can see how it just goes right on that bottom piece.
How do you undo?
Control Z should be undo, but if you accidentally assign something, don't worry, we're going to reassign it later. Okay, so you see how easy we were able to just drop that on there and get that bottom to now look like a brushed metal. All right, so now what I want is this. We're at the point of pretty much labeling things. So let's put the label on the can. All right, so I'm going to scroll up to paint. There we go. And I'm going to go to metallic paint. And I'm going to drag, it doesn't matter because we're going to put a label on it, but I'm going to drag this blue metallic paint onto the can. Okay, and again, you can see there's reflections happening on this can where it automatically is looking very much like a blue metallic can. Okay, but now we need to change this. Now we can load that material a couple different ways. One way is we can just double click right on the object. Okay, double clicking right on the object will pull up on the right side. It'll pull up the material for it. You'll see that there's a base color and a metal color in this instance. There's a metal coverage, metal roughness, clear coat roughness, clear coat refraction. A bunch of different options that we could play with further and further. I don't know why that has a little arrow next to it. It's not opening. The spot we want to go to is where it says texture. So we're going to click on the texture. And then here is where we can load color, specular, bump, and opacity. So I'm just going to double click on the color. And it opens up my texture. And I'm going to go into my source images and find the Gillette label. Okay, so I just go into my source images, grab the Gillette, and hit open. Just double click right on the color. Okay. Now in Maya, I recommend if you're rendering out of Maya and Mental Ray, you save all your textures as ifs. When I came into here, it has no idea what an if is, so I had to go back into Photoshop and resave my ifs as tiffs. Not a huge deal, but I just have to be aware of that. Okay, and just so you can see how I knew that, if I double click and wait. If I go down here to where it shows all the files that it could input, I saw that none of these were if. So any one of these formats I could bring in. So TIFF was one. I'm comfortable using TIFFs. Wonderful. I recommend highly against ever using a JPEG as a texture. JPEGs degrade in quality. So if you get a JPEG and you want to use it, the first thing you should do is save it as an IF for Maya and Mentoray or a TIFF for this, okay? All right, so we have our label on the can, but it obviously doesn't look like our picture, okay? It doesn't look like it looked like inside of Maya. So down here, these are all the properties for it. You can see that the type, it says box map. So what it's doing is it's projecting this texture in the front and the top and the whatever else. I want to tell it, just use the UV coordinates that I gave you. Okay? And then I also scroll down and I make sure that DPI is turned up. So just like everything, there's going to be a bit of a learning curve. But some of the things in here is this area right here where it says texture map. So a couple of you had this on brushed. And so this is like a default texture that was loaded. So obviously that's not going to let us load a file. So we just had to change this to texture map. And then load that Gillette image. And then make sure it's set to UV coordinates. Okay. Now we still can adjust some of the parameters here. Okay. Now I could, in Maya, what I would do is if I needed to change where this label was, I would rotate the whole can. And that's an option here. We could do that here too. But we can also just go into this and say shift the X. So you can see as I'm shifting the X, I'm actually rotating that texture around. So I'm going to scoot it down to like -0.02. I'm also going to shift the Y up a little bit because it got cut off a little bit. Okay, and that was just so you could see that we are able to edit stuff inside of here. I wanted you to see that, so I left it a little bit off. Okay, so you can adjust the shift X and the shift Y for that material just to kind of reposition where that's going to be laid out. All right, so now what I need to do is I need to match the color of the cap with one of these colors here, because the cap obviously is a different blue than the rest of my can and it looks weird. Also this blue down here, I really don't like that blue. So if I double click the can cap, that brings up that material. Then all I have to do is click on the color and use the eyedropper to grab one of these colors. And now that color for that cap is now aligned with what the texture is. Okay, I'll show that one again. So I click on the color swatch for diffuse, click on the eyedropper, and then I can pick any color that I want over here. So I can even pick like this blue. And you can see it instantly, so if you don't like it, then you just pick a different color. Or you can manually go through and start tweaking it until you get to the color you want. Or you can go into Photoshop and grab those color settings and use that. So that looks pretty close there. Okay, so we can double click anything, grab this color swatch, and use the eyedropper to sample any of those colors. So we'll do the same thing on the bottom, except I'm not going to color sample. I'm just going to take the color and change the colors here to grays. And this is, I think, probably one of the worst things about the software is that each one of the areas has different ways that we can edit color. So like on the cap, when I double click it, there's a diffuse, there's a specular, and there's a roughness. When I clicked on the bottom one, there's color, texture, and roughness. Those are the only three. Now all of those are based off of what kind of material it is. This is a metal, so the metal material has these settings. Okay, so if I were to swap this metal to plastic, I would get different settings there that I could start off with and play with to adjust. If I went to glass, I would get different settings. Okay, so for this one, because there's no color information here except for the texture, when I go to the texture, there is color information I can load into that specific texture itself. So if I wanted to make this gray and red, let's say, for some reason, I can give this a bit of a reddish tint just by adding a little bit of red into that texture. All right, I don't want to do that, but I'm just saying I could do that if I wanted to. Okay. Also, these bumps are going horizontally, so if I wanted to, I could rotate the bumps vertically, so it looks like the brushing is going up and down as opposed to sideways. Again, something else we could play with. All right, so now I want to add this wood onto here. So I'm going to scroll down to woods, and you'll see the woods that they have in here are actually pretty decent. I'm going to use the ash wood and just drop it right on the sign. Okay, and once we got our ash on there, then we can do the same thing to get the texture on there. We just go to our textures, go to the folder for the texture, and load in the sign. Okay, now how do we get this texture for the sign to line up correctly? Change our type to UV coordinates. Okay, so we changed it on this one, and you'll see that the texture didn't line up right. Now what it should be doing is it should be looking at the UV coordinates and just overlaying them, and it works perfectly. But there's something else happening in here, and that thing that's happening is way down here, and it's the DPI. So each material has a DPI you can set. I don't have a reason for this, so I just turned it off. Ours are already set up. It's lined up perfectly. It should work. Yes, ma'am. So if we are over here on the texture, there was a specular and a color. We could have loaded it on either one. And it's no big deal. You can just uncheck it or add it or whatever. There's even a spot for bump. So if we wanted to add a bump to this, we could add a bump onto that as well. All right. So now what we're going to do is the light bulbs. Okay. So now watch how I do my light bulbs, and then you could see how you can do your light bulbs. So if I go here, I'm just going to open this up a bit so I can see it better. So I'm going to go into this, and again, you don't have to worry about getting it perfect. So if you grab the wrong material, try something else, okay? On here, there's no lights. This is one of the sucky things about this software, is there are no actual lights in the scene. All of our lighting information is coming from this big image I'll show you in a second, this big bubble of lighting information. So if we wanted a light, we would actually take an object and tell that object to emit light. So under here, one of our materials is actually lights. Do you want it to be an area light, an emissive light, an IES light, or a point light? I'm just going to hit emissive, and I'm going to click on, I believe it's the emissive neutral, I think was the good one. No, this one, the emissive warm. That one turned out really good when I used it. So watch how I can assign this, because if I grab this and assign it, you'll see how it goes on every other one. Okay, because in my file I assigned a different material to every other light bulb, right? Right. So on yours, you obviously can't do that because yours isn't set up like that. So what you have to do is go over here, and you have to grab every other light bulb. So when I click, there it is, this one lit up. So I'm going to hold Control and try to grab every other one. Now I'm going to tell you that, I'm going to say I did it on purpose, but I probably didn't, that they're not in order. So you see as I Control click that it grabbed the one way over there, even though it's every other one. But you'll see that this one is actually a light one. So I have to just make sure that I grab the correct ones. So I need you to Control click every other light bulb in your scene. And then you're going to drag the material to the light bulb over here, and that will assign it.
Actually, click the light bulb. And then we want to give them an emissive light.
We're going to do an emissive light, but don't assign it yet. We want to do one more thing before we do that, just to help us stay organized inside here in case we ever have to do this again. Okay, so I have every other light bulb selected. So inside this scene area, I'm going to right click on one of them and say add to group. And this is kind of a weird thing. It doesn't like automatically create a group. I have to say I want a new group and calling it on bulbs, whatever.
On bulbs.
What do you do?
Right click on any one of them and then go to add to group. In the, yeah, right there.
There you go.
And then make a new group and then assign it to them.
Okay.
And then while you're at it, now you should be able to grab the other bulbs really quick and add to group. And we'll just call this off bulbs. All right, so once you have those two groups, you should notice now inside your scene layout that you have models, you have off bulbs, you have on bulbs, and then you have your Keyshot send. So this is, again, another way to kind of organize stuff after the fact so that we can easily just assign stuff to them without having to do it otherwise. So the emissive warm, I like the emissive warm one on my on bulb, so I can just middle drag this onto the on bulbs group. Whoops. I drug it right onto this one, not that one. There we go.
On bulb.
So drag your emissive warm onto the on bulbs, and then under glass, find just a nice clear glass. And then assign that to the off bulbs. Oops, that clear glass is a little bit too clear. I'm going to go to color density. I think that one might be a little bit nicer looking. Yep, go to color density and you'll find a little bit better looking glass bulb. Alright, so we can keep playing with all of this stuff until we're happy with all the settings in here. Some of the stuff we may not like is, you know, look how sharp my reflections are. Once we have it to this stage where everything is assigned, then we can start to go back and tweak what we don't like. So some things I don't like is this can is very reflective. You can see the light bulbs inside the can, and I don't really like that. So I may double click the can and then go over here to my metal roughness and crank that up. The rougher the metal is, then the blurrier those reflections are. Okay? Now I also have clear coat roughness, so that's something else. So I may want to pull up the clear coat roughness and pull down the metal roughness and just see what the results are. And again, because this is so quick, you don't have to worry about remembering every single thing. It's literally just like, yep, nope, and just keep going. So that works pretty good because that's the clear coat on there. The cap, same thing, and maybe I want to tweak that, so I'm going to double click. Here's the roughness parameter, just pull it up a little bit. Yep, that's good. Okay. Now we created an emissive material, right? Our light bulbs are emissive, but they're not really lighting anything up. So we're going to fix that in a second. First things first, let's Control S to save our file, and just drop it into. I just like to put it right inside my regular folder. So this is Demo Gillette. I like to drop it in right here. So I'm just calling it Sarcona_render Gillette. Okay. Oh, the background. So inside of Keyshot, it comes with a background. It comes with a ground and everything. We don't even need our background. So if I go to the scenes area, I can see, here it is, white B drop Mia X. So if I just uncheck that, it'll get rid of that white backdrop that's back there. And that makes me realize that I also forgot to label the strings that are hanging down. So I'm just going to grab cloth and leather and just drop this weave right on top of the leather ropes. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to save again. There we go. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to see my light bulbs emitting something. So under the the settings button, we have self shadow, and that's our only option set right now. So if we turn on global illumination, we'll see that the light bulbs are now actually emitting some sort of light. All right.
Where was the white surface? I can't find that.
It should be white B drop Mia X under the Keyshot send.
Keyshot send.
Yes. All right. So now the light bulbs are actually emitting something. It actually looks like we're getting some sort of lighting coming off of them, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, how did we do that now?
Under settings, global illumination.
Global illumination.
Okay. Now we could also double click the light bulb, and again we could tweak what the settings are. Because this is an emissive object, we could crank up that intensity to, let's say, 30. And now we're going to blow it out, and again, it's obviously way too much. But you get the idea that we could really tweak what this is doing. Now your goal in this is, like I said, to kind of think about the entire plan from the very start to the very end of this. Gradually throughout the semester, you'll become more attuned to what you need. So as I'm looking at this, I'm saying, yes, that looks pretty decent. Thinking 5 might be better. That looks pretty decent. But what I want to do after the fact is I don't really have any like halos around the light bulbs, right? So it would be nice to also have a halo around each light bulb to make it look like it's glowing. Yes? No? Maybe? Okay. So inside here, we don't have that ability to do that. All right? So I know that in post, I'm going to need to do that. So in order for me to do that in post, I need to be able to isolate those light bulbs. So knowing that these are the whitest things in my scene, I should be able to pull a selection mask. So you know, like in Photoshop, we can go to color range and click a color and it'll grab everything that's that color. Essentially, we can do something like that and grab that color. We could also render out separate passes from here that allow us to isolate those, okay? So one of those that we'll get into is in the render settings, but we'll play with that in a little bit. All right, so that's looking pretty good. All right, so now let's say that we are happy with everything that's in our scene, and then what we want to do is we want to change something like the environment. So just like we dropped colors and materials onto our objects, I can go to the environment tab and I can pick from any one of these environments. So right now I can go to, let's say, HDRI location urban. I just literally drop it there. There, my stuff is now in the streets. And I can spin around. And you can see how it kind of looks like it's right on there. Yes, ma'am.
Can you customize your own scenes?
Yes, you can. These are just HDR files. So you could shoot your own HDR files. You could use a website like Internet Explorer froze up on me earlier. Like SIBL. Oops. Come on now. Oh my god. The Sybil Archive, which is SIBL. And SIBL has free HDR sets, and all of these things here are different HDRs that you could actually bring into your scene and use as environments and backdrops and whatever else for your stuff to be lit.
What's that called?
SIBL. It's by HDR Labs. And these can also be used inside Maya too. There's actually a plugin that they offer where you just open up their thing and say, I want this in Maya. You click a button and it drops everything set up inside Maya to use with Mental Ray. It's pretty sweet. Okay.
Google Maps too, like the Street View.
Or Google Maps Street View, yeah. Well, the Street View is the HDR, but you'd have to, yeah.
Anything fancy schmancy about it.
Right,
If you
just
want
to drop
something,
it in.
there it is.
Now there is a difference, just so you're aware, of something that's just a flat flat panoramic and an HDR. So an HDR image is when you take several pictures of the same area. So what I would do is, just to show you what this is, I have to go back to Google, because otherwise it's going to crap out of me. So if you look at this, this looks much more dynamic than a regular image, okay? And the way that this image is created is they take one picture at a very low setting, okay? So like, let's say you grabbed your phone and you snapped a picture. What your phone does is it goes out and it searches the scene and it says, okay, it's kind of a bright day, so I'm gonna tone the settings down to make sure that everything is within a good range that you can see it. If you're at night, sometimes it'll brighten things up, right? Same kind of thing. So what this is it takes pictures that look very dark and takes pictures that look very bright, and there's a range that it takes them, and it smashes all those together into one image. That way you can see the brightest thing inside your scene, like the sun, and still see the darkest thing, like the shadows. That's the only way that that works, is you take multiple exposures of these. So that's where this lighting information is so realistic, is because that's how this works, is that there's a bunch of images smashed into this one image. That makes it very realistic to see what this lighting is looking like. And we could even come to the environment tab here and adjust things like the brightness. And you can see as I pull this down, now it looks like it's kind of like at night. Okay, it's not just darkening the image, it's actually going to what it looked like when it was super dark in the image. And then when I take this really bright, it's actually pulling up the brightness as to what it looked like when it was really bright. You get much more accurate information when it's not just playing with brightness and contrast. It's actually reading pixel data. It's actually reading information. We can also rotate this around, so if we wanted to hit this from a different view or relight our scene, we could do that too. We could also play with the height. So as we move this up or move this down, we're adjusting that. We could also change the background. So right now this is lighting the environment, but we could just have a flat color too. We can just say, I want you to use this environment to light up my objects, but I want to only see it on a white background, just a flat color. That's all I want to see, and that's what we're seeing here. And you can look at the shadows and see what these are doing, and maybe I want to rotate this a bit more. There we go. So now we're getting a different lighting, and I want to pull this down a little bit more. Maybe shrink the size a bit. Okay, so all these things we could play with. We could also drop in a different background image that we would load. I don't have an image, but we could load in an image right here. Okay, typically for most things that you're going to do product-wise, you're going to stick to more of these studio lighting setups. Okay, and because these ones are typically, if they're going to shoot something in a studio, they would use this kind of setup. Startup one. There we go. All right, and then this startup one is good because if you look at the picture of this, it's very soft. Everything is very soft. We're not getting a whole lot of contrast in it. But sometimes you want to have something with a little bit more contrast to it. Oops. So you may go to something like the panels. So these panels actually give you some really good contrasty light inside your scene. So I may want to, pull the height up some so I don't see the bottom of that. I may make the size bigger so I don't see that. There we go. And so what these are going to give you is, you ever seen those phone commercials? They have a phone that just kind of like flies in off the screen, and just you see this glimmer, you see these like little hot spots on the phone of reflections of these kinds of panels in the background. That's how you get those. You wouldn't get those any other way. All right, so each one of these can really play a role in how this image is looking. So you see here, it's a little bit dimmer, just based on this image compared to that image. Maybe I want to try that one. Maybe I want to try that one. Okay, and again, this is something where you should explore it, and to the point where it just becomes a fun thing, because now you're like, it's drag and drop. As much as we don't want drag and drop stuff, we want to be able to customize it. We get a good drag and drop start, and then we can start to play with these settings. Maybe we take the brightness down some. Maybe we take the brightness up some. Okay, to get that end result of what we're after. All right, and a lot of companies will use this for doing just this. Like, I want to see what that car is going to look like in the studio. Now what is it going to look like on the streets? Now what does it look like in a forest? And you can do all these kinds of things, save all these images out, and now they're ready. They're ready for like a brochure or a magazine or a whatever very quickly. Okay, so we can keep playing with this, for hours and hours and hours, but that's the gist of everything that we're going to be doing. Okay. Now, just to kind of cover a couple things, if I needed to change my label, where would I go to change my label? Like what the actual label said.
Maya?
Nope.
Your original image.
Right, my original image, which was created in Photoshop. Okay. So if I need to edit this texture at all, I would go into Photoshop, and then I could tweak that image, and then just save it as a TIFF and then reload it. If I need to edit this, same thing. Go into Photoshop, edit that image. If I need to change the placement of my objects, I could grab the objects here, and this is why I don't really care for doing it this way. Come on, click, click, click. So I have to click all three of these objects, and then I can go to position, and then I can click on the move tool, and it's, oops, I skipped something here. I don't know what that is. Oh, I had the cap in there. Yeah, I can ignore that. But it's a little bit tricky to lay it out, just because it's not like Maya's. It's definitely doable, and we can scale it up or scale it down or whatever. I just prefer doing all that stuff inside Maya beforehand, before I get in here. All right, maybe I'll take this and just go to the move tool and just nudge it over or whatever. Okay. Now, it is just like Maya and just like every other program you're going to play with. Get out of the move tool. There we go. There we go. It does crash, so you want to make sure that you save your stuff. Oh, come on. I want that backdrop on. White backdrop. Cancel. There we go. All right, so now how do we get this out of here? All right, so that's obviously the big question. We brought it in, we imported it. How do we then get it out of this software? So just like Maya, there are render settings. So if we go to render and we go to render here, it'll bring up the render settings. And it has animation, still image. Like I said, typically you're going to work with a still image. The one thing we haven't talked about yet is really resolution. Okay, right now we're dealing with whatever our screen can fit. So if our screen is one of those Macs in the room next door that have like a 3000 by 10,000 resolution or whatever they are, we can fit a lot of pixels on this. This one is defaulting to, under settings, it's defaulting right now to 618 by 621 because that's all the pixels that will currently fit on my screen. Okay, so if I'm setting this up and I want to know exactly what my camera is going to look like when it renders, why aren't you spinning? Oh, I do. Thank you. There we go. I need to adjust this resolution in order for that to happen. So I can't go over here and I can't, and this is a ridiculous thing, I think. I can't set this to 1920 by 1080 because it's going to work on here. That's why. No, it did resize it. There we go. So it resizes it to the same proportions to 618 by 347. All right. So it doesn't render it out 1920. It just shrinks it down so that it fits on the screen. But this window that's here is what's going to render. So in your case, you're going to be rendering something that's 8 by 10. So you would have to go under here to 8 by 10. Come on. There we go. So 618 by 621. Aspect ratio, 400. There we go. 400 by 402. So you change it that way. And then you'll be able to set up your composition, how you want this thing to render out. Now, if I go up here, I can play with the perspective camera of how distorted this is. So if I lower this, I'm going to get more perspective in here. That's like way too much because it's not even letting me zoom in. Go to 12. Oops. I'll just set this back to 35 so I can actually zoom in. Come on. Right.
Because the aspects left? No?
It shouldn't be. It was locked before.
Yeah.
It doesn't want me to zoom in and out.
So it can do animation.
It can do animation, but it's more of like turntable animation. I'm going to pause this. Okay, so I paused like the updating and then unpause it. Maybe that'll lock it now. All right, just being stupid. Selection scene sets, settings, whatever. All right, so it typically shouldn't. What I typically do is just shut down the computer, shut down the software, and then restart it. If I pick a different resolution now, it'll let me zoom in and out. Nope, it's still not letting me zoom in and out. And I may have just hit something I didn't know about. Anyway, so when you render this, you go to render. You pick your resolution. So because you're rendering out an 8 by 10 image, you're going to go with right here. And this is kind of the neat thing about it too, is you can get this set up for print. Is you're going 8 by 10, and you're going at 300 pixels. Oops. See, it's still locking that aspect, so I'd uncheck that. There we go. 8 by 10. There we go. Default that. It shouldn't be locking that, but I'm not sure why it's locking it. I think I've done something wrong on here. Anyway, so I would recommend you also save these as something that is not like a JPEG, where it's locking you into something specific. So a JPEG is loose quality the whole time. I render typically everything as an EXR. You get the most bang for your buck as an EXR. So I would recommend you render it as an EXR. And then under the stuff here, just make sure everything's good. Yes, yes. Under the quality, there's a bunch of settings. Typically the defaults have worked out for me pretty good. You could always just go to the maximum samples and play with the one setting here if you need just better quality or worse quality. There's also a queue. I don't need to play with that. There's a region. Don't need to play with that. Here I'll go with depth pass and clown pass and render layers. So now for the example, let me just set this down to something lower. Why it's still locked. And then I'm going to hit render. Oops, if I pick where it's supposed to go to. By default, it goes to the C drive. You probably don't want to render to the C drive. So I'm just going to select that folder for now and then hit render. And what this is going to do is it's going to render out my color pass, which is this cut off image right now. And then it's going to render out a depth pass, and it's going to render out a clown car pass, okay, or clown pass. And when I open up Photoshop, you'll be able to see what these allow us to do. All right, and the rendering happens actually pretty quick. You can see here it's at 78%, so it's almost done with our one image, which is looking, obviously it's really close, but it's looking pretty okay. When we get into Photoshop, then we should be able to tweak some of our stuff. Now, some of the things we may want to do later on is maybe we want to take out the background. Maybe we want to adjust colors on the cap, or adjust colors on the cream, or adjust whatever. And that's where Photoshop is going to come in handy when we start tweaking this stuff. So we wait for this to get done, and it'll give us a check mark here saying you're done, and then you can close it. Otherwise, if you hit X, obviously it stops it from rendering. And it says this has only taken about 78 seconds so far, and now it's done. Okay. So if I go to open, and I go to my P drive, into my folder, into here. Okay, so there's the three files that I get. I get a regular EXR, which is the color, which is what we just saw. I get a depth pass, and I get a clown pass. The depth pass in Photoshop isn't going to be usable, so I'm not even going to worry about it. I just want you to see it inside of Photoshop. I'll close this. I hit OK, and then reopen that file. So EXR in depth. I'm going to say as transparency, and as transparency. There we go. Okay. So inside of here, we're getting 32-bit images, so there actually is a lot of information stored inside of these. And this is what our image came out as. Now again, because it wouldn't let me zoom out, it's not cropped correctly, but it's good enough for what we're showing. The clown pass is a pretty decent pass because what it allows us to do is, if you look, there's a difference in color between every one of our materials. So we can use this. I'm going to copy it and then paste it. And it lays right on top of it, which is very, very nice once it pastes in. Paste. There we go. And I can use this as a way to use a color range to isolate certain things, or use my magic wand. Oops, sorry, magic wand doesn't work at 32-bit. I'm just going to downgrade this. This is part of the limitations of doing this in Photoshop, is that Photoshop doesn't handle 32-bit all that well. So just for this demo, I'm going to render. Slow down. I'm going to take this into 8 bits just so we can see it. Don't merge. There we go. So now I can go to select color range. And if I highlight this blue right here, you'll see that it selects just the sign. And I can use this as a way to kind of select it a little bit better. Once I have it selected, then I could turn this off. I could go to an adjustment layer. I could add, let's say, a hue and saturation. And now what it's going to do is allow me to desaturate just that one area, or overly saturate it, or shift the coloring on it. All right, so it's a great way to help isolate certain areas we want to play with. Now in this case, we wouldn't want to do something like that, but what we might want to do is grab those light bulbs that are lit up, which is these ones here. I'm going to take my fuzziness down a little bit, just because our color is so close. Make sure I grab the right ones. I did. Okay, I can make a new layer. I can fill the new layer with white. There we go. And then on this layer, I can just double click. And it's going slow because I'm recording and I have 7 programs open, and Keyshot, I'm sure, is still trying to calculate something here. Let me pause this so it's not trying to calculate still. There we go. So in here, I can go to outer glow, and then I can pull that spread up, pull that size up, and now you can see how inside of Photoshop I've created a little outer glow that we would have on top of this, just to add a little bit more realism to those light bulbs. And just to show that a little bit more clean, I'll even give it like an orangey color. I'll take the opacity up so you can see it a little bit better. There we go. Okay. Now I could also take the fill off of this. If you don't know what the difference between fill and opacity is, fill means don't show the actual layer information, just show the effects. Okay, so I pull the fill to 0, I get none of that white circle that I just created, I just get the glowing effect. So you can see there's a huge difference now where I've enhanced this image just by adding that glow on top of it. Okay, so that's what you're going to be thinking about the entire time as you're working on yours, as you're taking your imagery that you've created, your model and your textures you've created, and bringing them through Keyshot, is what's the end goal? What do I want this to look like? What do I want my shadows and my reflections and all this other stuff to look like? And how do we get them to look nice and neat? Okay? So once you're done with your image, you're just going to save it as a TIFF or an EXR or something else, just so you have it locked in with your name. Typically, I save stuff as a PSD and as a TIFF. And just so you can see what some of these images look like, I'm going to show you what some of them look like that I've played with. I'm going to find the right file. There we go. So this is that creature that I pulled up, the one I did all in ZBrush. Yes, missing a font, sure. So this came out of ZBrush, and it looked pretty okay, but I really wanted to enhance it inside of here. So this is all the stuff I've done to this image coming straight out of ZBrush. There's that, and I added this just to give it a little glow around the edges. And then I added this. Oh, I didn't use that, sorry. I added this just to kind of lock in some of the darkness right in the shadowy areas. And then I adjusted some of my colors. I adjusted some more colors. I add the little title here. Oops, that's just my mask. That's just that. And then I had my background and all this other stuff. Okay, so don't think that your image is ever completed just rendering it out. It takes a little bit of finessing to take it from CG and get it actually into Photoshop and start playing with it to customize what it's looking like. Okay, so this is all rendered out of ZBrush just because I wanted to play more with ZBrush to get it rendered out. Now Keyshot is a bit limited as to what we can get out. So right now we're dealing with basically just the color information and the clown pass essentially. But there's other stuff that we could pull out of here. It really bothers me that it's not letting me do that. Next camera. Oh, it's like locked to something. I don't know what it's locked to. Whatever. All right. So what you're going to do for the rest of today is I want you to take your stuff and get it, if it's ready, get it out of Maya, bring it into Keyshot, and then do these final steps of texturing it and rendering it out and getting your final image. Okay? For next week, we are going to be starting doing the environment. So what I want you to do is I wanted you to kind of think about some stuff that you would use ahead of time, okay? So next week I want you to have some stuff brought in that you plan on using for it. So it could be a bunch of reference images, it could be a plan, as much stuff, as much information as you can grab about what you want to create, I want you to bring with you next class, all right? So when I do an environment, my first stop is just Google, just searching for whatever it is I'm doing. If I'm doing a wood shop, I look up wood shops and I find 700 pictures of wood shops. And then I go through and find 700 pictures of other items that are inside of a wood shop. And I go through and find textures for wood shops, so for items that would be in there, like textures for metal.
Oh, so we're doing like a room?
You're going to be doing an environment, okay, but we're doing a part of the environment. Okay, so when I say environment, it could be like an interior like this, or it could be an exterior. All right, now my advice is if you're going to do something like exterior, it's very difficult to, time-wise, to do trees and grass and leaves and all this other stuff. It's much easier and more module to do something of an environment like a classroom or something. Because basically if you were doing this room, we have the walls, which is obviously not that big of a deal, and then we have one computer desk that we would duplicate all over the place, and now we have a room. Okay? So it's much easier to do something like that as opposed to the other one. Okay? So I want you to, for next week, bring in all your source material, all the stuff that you're planning on using for this, and your plan of what you want to do. And from there, we're going to start working on little pieces of it to get to that final stage. Okay?